Hey, gorgeous, and welcome to this episode of the Magnetic Woman Show. I'm your host, Lauren Joyce, and today I want to talk about my most controversial opinion, perspective, beliefs when it comes to none other than Mary Magdalene. So, if you're new here, I am a Magdalene priestess. I have been working with Mary Magdalene since about 2016. I've been deeply devoted in my spiritual practice to working with Mary Magdalene, learning about Mary Magdalene. I've led pilgrimages to the south of France. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory about how I started working with Mary Magdalene and then my most controversial opinion, belief about her. So if you're watching this, you either, or listening to this, you either engage in my content regularly or you're pulled in because this is about Mary Magdalene. So I grew up Catholic. I went through 10 years of Catholic school on both sides of my family, like as far back as anybody knows, Catholicism is there, right? And when I was in Catholic school in the 90s and early 2000s, I learned that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. She was the epitome of the fallen woman. She was the example of the fallen woman. Excuse me. And so that was the belief that I had of her, right? She was like there. She was a follower of Jesus, but she was the example of like female sin. Fast forward to about 2015. So at that point I had been learning about feminine energy and pleasure, sensuality for about 2 years at that time. And then this is so funny. I have the exact book I read. I read this book, The Return of Divine Sophia. This book, I would say, was the catalyst for my spiritual awakening, deconstruction journey, and devotion to Mary Magdalene. So, when I read this book, I got to a part of the book that talked about Mary Magdalene and said that this whole idea of her being a prostitute was made up and that she wasn't a prostitute, but she was in fact a priestess. Now, that in and of itself would have been mind-blowing, and it was. But then this book goes on to say that she was a priestess from the Isis lineage, meaning she's a priestess with the knowledge and practices of sacred sexuality, pleasure, sensuality. That concept, that this information cracked me open because what happened was I learned in that moment, I learned that obviously the church had lied, which I was already deconstructing religion a little bit at that point, so I knew the church lied about a lot of things. So the church lied about who she was in her role. But instead of being the example of sin, the example of the fallen woman, she was the example that everything I had learned that was sinful was in fact holy. Pleasure, desire, sex, sensuality, feminine spiritual authority, like all of these things that I learned that were bad, wrong, sinful, not only were they not only were they okay to experience, they were actually considered holy. I mean, I still get chills, right? So I became obsessed with learning anything and everything I could about Mary Magdalene. Now, this is back in 2016. Now, pause on my personal story. Let's do a little historical explanation here. So, Mary Magdalene was with Jesus. She was at the crucifixion. She was the one who he resurrected to. Without her, there would be no Christianity. And for the first couple centuries of Christianity, she is seen as a central, important figure. Then Constantine comes in and basically creates what we know to be Catholicism, as a way to maintain power and control in Rome. And then fast forward to 591, when Pope Gregory the Great, yes, I put it in quotation marks because in my opinion, he's the fucking worst, decides to give a homily where he says Mary Magdalene is a prostitute. So this idea that she was the fallen woman, the embodiment of female sexuality as sin, was created by a man in 591. So for 1500 years, the position of the Catholic Church was that she was a prostitute. Then in the 1960s, we have the Vatican II, and we have a lot of like upgrading and modernizing of the Catholic Church. That's when the Catholic Church stopped doing all masses in Latin and allowed mass in, the native language where the church was. So here in the US, mass was in English, and Italy was in Italian, and France was in French. French. Prior to that, mass was in Latin up until the 1960s, right? So, and there, I'm sure you can still find Latin masses. Anyways, so in the 1960s, they're like, oops, so you know how we said she was a prostitute? Okay, teensy tiny mistake. She wasn't. In fact, she was the apostle of the apostles. She was kind of like the head apostle. But okay, let's just forget that the last 1500 years we've lied about her and move on. Then it's not until 2016 that she gets a feast day. So if you know anything about Catholicism or have learned anything about Catholicism from me, saints, people that are canonized as saints in the Catholic Church have feast days. And she's obviously considered a saint. She is not given a feast day until 2016. So 2016 is about the time where I'm fascinated by this. Now, this is like pre-Instagram stories, people, okay? Absolutely no TikTok. Facebook, we had Facebook, but it isn't what it is now. Like, I mean, 2016, I think this was even pre Periscope. If you were around for Periscope, you're a real one. I was on Periscope, okay, people, that's how long I've had my online business. So finding information about Mary Magdalene as a priestess was very challenging. There were not a lot of people talking about her. Not a lot of people writing about her. Like 2016 is pre Mary Magdalene revealed, okay? Which is one of the most like seminal, that's not it. I think it's in my room. Seminal works about Mary Magdalene, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So fast forward to 2019, and I'm at a retreat with, ironically, a lot of Christian women. I didn't know I didn't know that prior to this retreat. And in the retreat, we're being led through a meditation. And in the meditation, the person leading is like, okay, turn and see your guide. And when I turn, I am not kidding you, I see this exact image. I see Mary Magdalene. And in the meditation, I do a double take. Oh, sorry. If you're listening to the podcast, it's the image from the Divine Feminine Oracle deck. In the meditation, I do a double take. I'm like, there's no way. There's no way Mary Magdalene's my guide. Yep, she's my guide. So absolutely since 2019, I would say that was like the deeper initiation for me into becoming a Magdalene priestess. And Mary Magdalene has been central for me in my deconstructing of religion journey, in my deepening of my sacred feminine, in my deepening of seeing pleasure as devotion, seeing pleasure as holy. And so I've been working with her for years. I've been a devotee for years. I've been a priestess for years. Now, here's where we get into what I believe is probably my most controversial belief about Mary Magdalene. I believe, and this is not based in like her gospel. You're not going to find other historians saying this. This is based in my own lived experience, embodied practices, and devotion to Mary Magdalene. I believe that she was the spiritual authority slash spiritually superior to Jesus. I believe everything that they taught either came from her or was initiated by her, through her, as the sacred feminine priestess. Because I believe that women are spiritually superior to men. I believe women are superior to men, but I believe women are spiritually superior to men. I believe that women have always been and are always meant to be the spiritual authority. I believe that women have a unique access to the divine that men do not possess, which is why the patriarchal religions have worked so hard to cast women out of spiritual authority roles, roles. The patriarchy has worked so hard to cast women out of spiritual authority roles because women are actually the spiritual authorities. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't know that there is an author as it's as much as it's just something that's been passed around. Men created religion because they were jealous that women create life. Around Easter, we hear a lot from people who teach about the sacred feminine, are devotees of Mary Magdalene, the fact that Jesus is considered the anointed one because Mary Magdalene anointed him. She was an anointing priestess. And this is again where I take it a step further and I'm like, I believe all of the spiritual wisdom that was being taught by him came from her or through her or was initiated by her. Women are the creators. And so here comes Jesus like spreading these new spiritual truths. He didn't create it. And I really truly believe it came from her, was inspired by her, was initiated by her. And the reason why he became the mouthpiece was because Rome, the Roman Empire, was deeply patriarchal at the time. Like women were seen below slaves. So nobody would have taken her seriously. So, in order for this message, in order for these spiritual truths to land, to be accepted, to be disseminated, it had to come through a male spokesperson. But it is also not lost on me that for 30 years after he died, she continued to priestess. According to the Bible, his teachings spanned about 3 years. So we're talking she's teaching and leading and like being a priestess for decades longer, almost as long as he was alive total. And she wasn't the one behind it. She's just regurgitating what she learned. No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We know historically that she funded his mission. So either he's a freeloader and she's the sugar mama, or she's also the one carrying all the wisdom. And I say this because, I think in this sea of so much about Mary Magdalene, there's, I see like two kind of main camps. One camp is people who teach from her gospel, which is amazing and beautiful, and her gospel is incredible, right? And that's really like they teach from her gospel, they teach how their lived experience kind of like reflects the gospel, how the gospel informs their lived experience. That's very much what Mary Magdalene revealed is. Incredible. Then you have the camp, which this is where I do an eye roll, that teach her basically as a cosmic fucking matchmaker. They teach her as the beloved. She's the beloved energy. Find your divine partnership. Find soulmate love. Like, imagine being a woman who is a priestess, has wealth and spiritual authority at a time when that was like absolutely not possible for women. You're in a relationship with a man for 3 years, and your entire life is defined by that relationship. Your entire life, people are just like, "Oh my God, help me find the one, please." Um, that again, to each their own. If you're coming to Mary Magdalene because you're like, I'm seeking soulmate love, that's amazing. Will everything I do and teach around Mary Magdalene help you? Yeah, probably. Is that the core of my work? Absolutely not. My relationship to her, my work with her, my connection to her comes back to two core principles. The sovereign feminine, so power of myself in myself, and pleasure is holy, pleasure as sacredness, pleasure as devotion. To me, the embodiment of the pleasure priestess is the embodiment of the sovereign feminine, the feminine that is whole in and of herself, right? And I think that that's my biggest issue with the whole like beloved energy is this idea of like we're a half of a whole that we like and especially within the patriarchy and all of the bullshit that we are fed as women about relationships and marriage and motherhood as a way to oppress and control us. I feel like the Mary Magdalene strictly as a beloved energy is just like half a step removed from that, and that's why I'm just like, no thanks. So for me, Mary Magdalene is the embodiment of the sovereign feminine. She's the embodiment of the pleasure priestess. She was the spiritual authority and is spiritually superior. Now, I'm sure people are going to come in and be like, well, they were equals. Like, okay, sure. And without her, he would have been nothing, in my opinion. He had no money without her. I personally think without her, he would have had no spiritual truths to be sharing, or maybe a tenth. And without her, nobody witnessed the resurrection. Like, there's all these people who are like devoted to Mary Magdalene, and they're like, I'm here, like I'm what a Christian, like how it should have been. I'm like, I'm I'm a Magdalenian, honestly. Like, I'm like, if we're gonna elevate anybody, it needs to be her. So, as I said, in 2016, the church was like, okay, she has a feast day, and it is July 22nd. We are approaching her feast day. For her feast day this year, I'm doing something that I've never done before. So I'm hosting a live ritual and activation called Mary Magdalene, the Pleasure Priestess. When I say I've never done this before, it's because I feel like I've never fully like stood here and kind of planted my flag as like, yes, I'm a Magdalene priestess and specifically a pleasure priestess. Yes, I'm a Magdalene devotee, and I believe it was her spiritual authority that led. Sorry, my light went out if you're watching the video. Um, so the pleasure priestess, Mary Magdalene, the pleasure priestess, is a live ritual activation where we're going to be really shedding any remaining remnant religious conditioning, especially around your spiritual authority, your spiritual leadership, your spiritual gifts. We're disconnecting from the Madonna whore paradigm so that we can really see pleasure as holy. We're awakening and invoking our inner pleasure priestess to bring more sacredness to our embodied living day in and day out. Um, the first 50 women that sign up get a bonus Mary Magdalene pleasure activation so you can get the ball rolling on your pleasure priestess journey. And it's going to be an incredible way to honor her, to connect to her, to learn about her more deeply. So, if you want to join us, you want to go to the magneticwoman.com/Magdalene dash ritual. The link is in the show notes. So if you're curious about it, you can look at it. Again, you want to be one of the first 50 women, which I would say is probably going to be within the first 24 hours because the price also goes up after the first 24 hours. I am charging for this ritual because, quite frankly, like there's this idea, I think, with a lot of spirituality and with a lot of social media and spirituality on social media, and especially women in spirituality, like if this is your gift, if this is what you're here to do, like it needs to be free. And let us not forget that Mary Magdalene was a wealthy woman. She was paid for her gifts. She was paid. And I think that there is such a power when you are a woman who's like, I want to activate my inner pleasure priestess, that you have a little bit more skin in the game than signing up for something free because this work is so sacred and so holy and also still so taboo and so confronting that it really requires you to be all in, be literally and figuratively bought into it. So, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like the price for this is nominal. Like it's nothing. It's just a way to get you into the energy of like, this work and me doing this work, me stepping into my inner pleasure priestess is worthy. Like, I am worthy of this. So if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll see you next time.